Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me today is Leah Fraley. She is the Executive Director of SCAN, Stop Child Abuse Now. Thank you so much for being here, Leah.
Thank you for having me.
So you are kind of new to the job, but not new to this work.
I am not, yeah. Been at SCAN now for, it'll be 2 months next week.
And so you come from you've actually spent your whole career in nonprofit.
I have. Actually, this year, I guess it'll be 20 years.
20 years.
This year in nonprofits. Just before coming to SCAN, I was actually at the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So I'm very familiar with child abuse and exploitation and serving the needs of kind of at-risk youth. Yeah.
So you saw that SCAN obviously had an open position, and you answered that. I have to tell you, I've lived in this area for a long time, and SCAN is, what, 30 years old?
30 years old this year.
30 years old, and I was not familiar with the organization until one of your board members, Laura Yeager, reached out to me and said, you should do a show on SCAN. And I'm like, absolutely.
What's SCAN? Yeah.
Right? But fill us in a little bit on what's happened over those 30 years.
Sure. You're not unlike a number of community members, right? People who work in this space certainly know of SCAN. We collaborate all over the region, but individuals who aren't necessarily in this space, SCAN is new to them. Our work and our impact maybe isn't. So over the last 30 years, we've certainly evolved. So the organization started in 1988 when a group of concerned citizens came together wanting to do something about child abuse and neglect in the county, or in the region, and wanting to do something not just about the issue today, but the long-term effect that it had on children. And so they started with that in mind and built programming around that. So we do things to educate the public, to build relationships between parents and children, and to advocate for children. And we've been doing that for 30 years. And we continue. I mean, the community has certainly changed, and the needs of the community has changed. But the way we respond to those needs has to evolve as well, and it has over the last 30 years.
So what kind of programs, so you're kind of delivering direct services to families, trying to help them, have better parenting skills, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So where do the people come from? What kind of programs, and where do the people come from that you serve?
Sure. All over. So we'll look just at, say, our parenting program. A lot of the other work we do, so the work we do, say, in advocacy or public education, also informs and supports the growth of the programs that we have in parent education. But they can be parents that the courts have suggested maybe need support from a parenting class. It could be, we have great relationships with schools and teachers and community organizations that help us to find parents who'd be interested and really benefit from our classes. But we also have a fairly significant online presence. We have a blog. We provide a parent resource center. So the parents who either know about us or happen to be online looking for information on something that they're struggling with as a parent have us as a resource, but they can also access our classes because they're free of charge and really structured. These are evidence-based programs structured to help parents through a series of different challenges that all parents come across.
True. I mean, I'm a parent. I'm not a perfect parent. I'm sure my kids would tell you that.
I'm
like,
not
oh,
either.
she is so not perfect. So what are some of the organizations that you collaborate with?
Of course, the government's a huge organization. We're incredibly lucky to have a number of partners, foundations. Any organization who's serving the needs of children and families, obviously the school systems, the court systems, human services, they are all really working towards the same goal and willing to partner with other people to help meet the needs of families. And so we're lucky that over that last 30 years have been able to build really strong relationships with them so that we're coming together to figure out the best way forward for families.
So is the work you do part of when the court orders parents to go through parenting classes?
That's part of, about 50% of the people who attend our parenting program are court-ordered. Following some situation, the court might say, let's take this class and see, and we have those parents. But they are kind of learning alongside parents who's kind of self-selected and came and said, I need help as a parent. So we don't, there's no difference between those two families. We completely understand in both cases parenting's tough and you need some help. and we're certainly there to help you through.
So thinking about the logistics of, first of all, trying to get parents someplace in a region this big, you're talking about transportation issues around their work schedule and childcare. Like if they've got children, what do you do when you are taking these classes? How does that work?
It's a good question. So a couple of different things. With any service provider, SCAN included, it's about meeting parents where they are, right? So we need to go to the community. We don't need to make this an obstacle they have to overcome to come to our classes. We want parents to get the resources we provide. So we're going to where they are already. So we're going into these communities where we see the most interest or see the most need. And then for each of those different programs, we're able to either provide transportation if necessary. We provide childcare for children under 4, right? So the parents can have access to those programs. But the parenting classes are also designed, there's a bunch of different types of programs, but they're designed to have a parenting program and a child program, right? A program for the child, so that when they finally come together, that it's obviously a different curriculum, but they're learning similar skills, so that when they come back together, they can use those skills with one another. So, say for example, I don't know how old your children are, but my children are past middle school, but that's a really difficult time in a child's life, and so being able to teach a parent maybe the developmental things that are happening with a child in middle school, which makes him or her go through some of these challenges, but then really working with that child at the same time, so that when they come back together, the parent knows a little bit more and the child knows a little bit more about how to communicate.
That's a big one.
Those types of things that for a parent in those situations can be really a struggle, because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what questions to ask. Or you think, I'm failing in some way because I don't know this information. That's not the case. And that's what SCAN's here for, is to build a stronger connection between the parent and child.
So, child abuse can happen anywhere, under any circumstances, behind the closed doors of homes, everywhere. It can be happening. But we have a very multicultural region. There's people who come from different countries, and they also bring their culture with them.
Sure.
So things that might be accepted in their culture perhaps are not accepted in this culture. Do you find that there are cultural issues?
Always. Not just language barriers. Obviously, our classes are in English and Spanish, and we understand that that's a need. But part of meeting parents where they are really includes that as well. Understanding that this isn't, do it our way, It's helping parents within their own comfort, within their own culture, within their own even habits, right? Is to help them figure out small, sometimes large, ways of making changes that feel right for them, so that they can be better parents where they are, because their children are living here. One of the things that we do, I'll give you an example. So one of the classes we have is a reunification class. And so for, say, a parent who's new, or maybe came early, maybe came to this country 3 years ago, they are now in this country and their child is joining them. And the challenges that come along with that. You don't think about, I'm a parent of a 9-year-old when I left. Now I'm a parent of a 12-year-old. And I don't know how to parent a 12-year-old because I haven't. Or some of the struggles that maybe the child's facing, right? Feeling left behind, or if this parent has another family, they've started another family, and maybe there's some resentment there. And being able to build the communication, being able to help some of the stressors of just being in a new place and not really knowing who to lean on, because you really need to lean on that parent. And so helping them build that connection again, and kind of finding the right way for them to communicate in a very different space, given a little bit of a trauma that's happened to them over a series of years. So, yeah.
And that's, I think that is, and I have talked on this show before about trauma-informed education, and the fact that teachers are being asked, first of all, to try to figure out if they've got students at risk for being neglected or abused. So teachers and they don't necessarily have training, and they don't really necessarily have training on how to deal with students who have gone through some sort of trauma. Yeah. So, I'm sure you have to lean on the schools quite a bit.
Absolutely. Teachers are in a unique position because you're right. They have a lot going on, right? They have a lot going on in their classroom. They build incredibly strong relationships. I don't know about you, but I don't know that I can still name the friends I had in school, but I can tell you every teacher I had.
Me too. Every single teacher I've ever had, I can tell you their name.
Yeah, so they're my favorite. And so they are in a unique position to really get to know that child, to know when something's off. And so providing training for teachers is critically important. But also empowering them, all right, giving them an opportunity and a safe place where they can ask those questions, because they're in the same situation all of us are. Am I right? Am I wrong? Did I do, you don't
want to overstep. On the other hand, what do you do if you don't do something and you suspect that there's a child in danger in some way?
Absolutely. One of the most powerful conversations, and this is when I was still at the International Center, one of the most powerful conversations I ever had was with a teacher who had taught at a school internationally, and she said, I know I missed things. I know I did. And I feel like I am in a position and have a responsibility now to not miss them moving forward. And that meant everything, because I know exactly how that must feel to look back and wish you had done something differently. But yes, we work with our schools. We always looking to build stronger relationships between schools and parents, and empowering parents to ask questions too.
Do you do training as part of one of the programs that you do at SCAN is offering training to teachers?
We do not. Now, that's not to say we don't have a directed training for teachers. We do through our, so if you kind of look at our work as public education, parent education, and advocacy, through our public education, we do bring people together. So any child-serving professional, if you will, around a table, not one table, but working together towards some common goal. And so that might mean we have a group called Allies in Prevention, and these are all child-serving professionals, so people who are working in this space coming together to share best practices, talk about the issues they're facing, and then to talk about common advocacy, common messaging, right? And so if we're all going out with one voice and talking about, say in this case, child abuse and neglect, that is exactly the type of kind of collaboration that forwards a message and gets people involved, because everybody's talking about it.
Absolutely, and you're a convener, and that's a really important aspect of this, is bringing people together so that they can talk about best practices. And when we return from our break, we're going to talk further with Leah Fraley.
Hi. Patience. Pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
They told me a bottle couldn't dream. That I would never become a superhero. But I learned how to fly. Just to come back in a new disguise and be the hero that I've always wanted to be.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me today is Leah Fraley, who is the Executive Director of SCAN, Stop Child Abuse Now. Thank you so much for being here, Leah.
Thank you.
So we were talking a little bit about, the programs and the tools that you have online as well, and convening groups of people so that they can talk about best practices and what's working. What are some of the other things you're doing to really try to raise in the public's visibility that child abuse happens everywhere? Yeah. I think there's a certain amount of reluctance for people to overreach or overstep or to question what their neighbors are doing or something they see somewhere.
Sure. So one of the things that we do through our work in public education, so part of that work obviously is convening people who are in this space, but is to build an awareness in the community amongst everybody in the community. And so what that might look like, that might be a campaign during the month of April, which is Child Abuse Prevention Month, and teaching people what to look for, the signs and symptoms of abuse, and how to react, and those types of things. But it also speaks to this other thing, I think, in general, and that's not just for people who are working in child protection, but just people. It's hard to go with our gut. It's hard to react when we don't know, are we right? Is this, it's hard to know what to do and how to ask those questions. And often we fall on the side of not doing anything. And so some of our work in public education really is about empowering you as an individual who happens to be around children. We really all have a responsibility to support children and to be a voice for children until they are ready to use their voice themselves. And so that's some of the work we do, is to not just build awareness, but to give you the tools as a community member to do something about it.
I was really surprised the other day. I walked through the doors of Fair Oaks Mall, and there was a big sign that said, "Don't leave your children in the car." Okay. And I thought, wow, I've never seen that before. I mean, you would think, do we have to tell people that? Clearly, we do have to tell people that, because children are still being left in hot cars, or left small children unattended. And so, they're going forward, are there other tools like that to help people, not just, my children are millennials that are not in car seats anymore.
Don't leave them
but
in the
just
car.
a reminder to me that it's not like I'm leaving my child in the car, but to be aware when I walk through a parking lot, then maybe we should all be looking around a little more carefully.
Well, and I grew up in the 80s, and so I'm of the, baby on board sign, right? Like, we were all kind of paying attention to the fact that there were children in that car. But we've gotten a little bit like that, right? Like, being comfortable. I can't remember who I was having a conversation with. They were at their friend's house, and they had a new child, and that child was sleeping on his belly.
Which used to be a thing, but it's
used
not
to be a
anymore.
Thing, it's not a thing anymore. And so she knew that was unsafe. She said, I had to say something, but my goodness, was that hard.
Yeah. Because it sounds like you're criticizing.
Yeah, because it sounds like you're judging their parenting skills.
Right.
And so she said something and was able to educate her friend. But I think that's the case. We got to get kind of to a point where we're not laser focused on whatever it is that's kind of we're doing, right? So going into the mall and passing, a car and not paying attention, or hearing a child maybe crying or screaming or something, and that's not my business. To keep children safe, it is our business, and that doesn't mean getting in somebody's space all the time. That doesn't mean kind of overstepping your bounds, but that does mean that we are a community of people who take care of one another.
Right, and I think there's been some recently, people overstepping their bounds and what is appropriate, whatever. It's things like someone calling the police because an 8-year-old is walking her dog by herself. This was a real thing that really happened. And this, the cops, Child Protective Services going on, what was your 8-year-old daughter doing out walking a dog? Because she's 8 and she can walk the dog.
That's a chore.
But, but that is somebody who's like, is it, so we do kind of all bring judgment and our own experiences. But I will have to say, even though it sounds ridiculous, I think the neighbor did the right thing, because Child Protective Services knocked on the door and said, and the parent was within their rights to say, my 8-year-old knows how to walk the dog by herself in the street, and I think that is safe, and it's not like, but these are the kinds of things that make us think twice.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and it's not just with children. I mean, it can be with anything, just kind of paying attention to your surroundings, knowing how you can support one another. I mean, we do that we do that all the time, holding the door, whatever it is. We don't necessarily do that when it comes to making sure kids are safe. And so that's just one of the many things that we have to pay attention to. We do a kind of, one of the brands that we use is Pinwheel. And it's a pinwheel for prevention. It's to remember child abuse. But that is just there. It's not that the pinwheel's doing anything magical. It's to remind you that you have a right and a voice to be a voice for children, and to remember that prevention's important, and that's how we stop this from happening in the first place. Our goal, not just as SCAN, but as a community, should be that children shouldn't have to need to begin with. It should be prevention, not just responding to abuse.
And do you see cycles or patterns in that? You know, I think there was, during the recession, there was talk about the fact that increased economic pressures on family. Sure. It was just spousal abuse, child abuse, because there were so many stressors on the family that sometimes we find when things take a downturn, you see a spike.
Yeah. I mean, and that's with anything. I mean, if you have, obviously during that time you had a challenge with people losing their jobs, any type of stressor, right? And that is in our daily lives. You react differently when you're under stress. We just do, and that can have a negative impact on your family and obviously your children. That's one of the reasons that we do parenting classes. That's not just to open up communication with children, but to also, there's a level of self-care that parents need to participate in that they don't always think about, right? Because you're just in the midst of being a parent.
I think
and whatever.
Anybody who's a parent understands
that. It's
right.
just hard to do. And we all kind of do the whole, I'm going to take 5 and walk away and all this other stuff. But is teaching them those strategies so that those types of things don't build up, because they will, especially for parents who are struggling in whatever way, either health or financially. At-risk parents need our support. And they need those other types of tools and resources so that they can respond appropriately to their children.
So how can people in the community kind of support your efforts?
There's a number of different ways. And so obviously participating in any of our different classes, participating in our prevention work, being a part of our public education work, important. Educate yourself on how you can support this broader mission, not just SCAN, but just serving children. Volunteering. SCAN is an organization, and you see this across all nonprofits, but SCAN as an organization really relies on our volunteers. We have volunteers who support our parenting programs, all sorts of different supports for our parenting programs. SCAN of Northern Virginia actually manages the CASA programs, the Court-Appointed Special Advocates Program in Arlington and Alexandria. Those advocates are all volunteers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so last year we had 78 CASAs. I mean, these are people like you and me who are taking. I mean, these are superheroes. If you saw the amount of work they do for children, it's actually amazing. So those are volunteers. Those are people we need working in our system. So obviously volunteers are incredibly important. And then donating. We are an organization that lives off of donations. That's how we do the work we do. And no matter the size, I mean, we certainly have large donations, we have small donations, we pay attention to each and every one of those because they allow us to do the work we do. And so that might mean if you have a small group and that group wants to raise money for something, choose SCAN, dedicate your birthday to SCAN. That's something that I see. I mean, I have a birthday coming up and I don't need anybody to pay attention to it, but you could dedicate it.
Yeah. And do you provide training for volunteers too? Do you have regular training? So if people go to your website, they can find that there's an upcoming training? Mm-hmm.
Yes, so we, on our website, there's always volunteer opportunities on there. We do an orientation. We've been doing it once, I think every 2 weeks. We might start to do about once a month as we go into the fall. Okay. So they come into our office, they learn everything about what we're doing and how they can support us. One of the volunteer things that we have right now is actually linked to an event that we have coming up, our Toast to Hope. It's an annual event, it's a fundraising event. It's where we bring the community of donors and volunteers together to say thank you and to raise money. And we have volunteers around that, obviously. And so that's one way that we raise volunteers and raise resources for the organization.
And what is that date?
That date is November 3rd.
Okay.
And it's in Springfield.
Okay.
And so anybody interested in learning more about SCAN, donating to SCAN, coming to Toast to Hope, they can visit our website, scanva.org. And learn all about us. And there's also, that's the same website to get a ton of resources for parents, grandparents, caregivers, anybody who has working with a child can go there, yeah.
You know, and we didn't even touch on caregivers and the fact that just like teachers, caregivers are also people who spend a lot of time with children and probably see patterns or see things that are clues.
Absolutely. You know, I think caregivers and parents, we sometimes don't see that difference, right? But they're people who are around our children all the time. We want to make sure that they have the resources on top of very much like what we do for parents, making sure that they have the training they need so that they can communicate, they know what to look for, they know how to respond, because there's certainly an amount of stress that goes to being a caregiver. But that they also have all of the resources they need to respond to what they see as a challenge with a child that's under their care.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like this event on November 3rd is a great way for people to come
Support us,
and find out, talk to donors, talk to other volunteers.
Yeah.
Your monthly orientations are also a great way for people to
Yeah.
find out what you do. And I'm assuming, since I haven't heard a lot about your organization, that some of those volunteers are going to be out there raising awareness by doing community outreach.
Absolutely. So we have a huge group of public education supports, volunteers, and that's what they do. I mean, you know, sometimes it's manning a table at an
Right.
event, passing out flyers, that type of thing, and really talking about the work we're doing. What if we had everybody in Northern Virginia knowing how they can, you know, help the organization, but help children? I mean, what if we had that, and what impact that would have? And so that's what a lot of our volunteers in public education do. They're getting out and really rallying people around a common message.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Leah, because this is really important information, and I think that our viewers will agree that this is something that you really need to know. Go to their website, find out more.